Wealth does not make a room warmer when respect has already left it. At 8:42 p.m., snow drifted over East 57th Street in Manhattan, soft as powdered glass against the black windows of the Meridian Spa, while the city lights from the 42nd floor trembled in gold, blue, and distant red. Inside, the air was warm with eucalyptus steam, polished basalt stone, and the clean mineral scent of heated spring water that cost more per month than most apartments in Queens. Every surface had been chosen with discipline. Italian travertine walls, Toto heated fixtures, fret robes folded at perfect 90-degree angles, and a reception desk carved from one uninterrupted slab of Nero Marchina marble. Nadira Vale noticed everything. She stood near the private lift to the Meridian Circle, dressed in a deep emerald suit with pearl buttons, her dark skin glowing beneath the low amber lights, her posture calm enough to make silence look expensive. 3 inches of snow had already gathered along the balcony ledge outside, and beyond it, Midtown looked like a jewelry box left open in the cold. The Meridian Circle had reopened after 6 months, $18, $7 million in renovations, and 214 pages of operating standards Nadira had written herself. No one mentioned that part. Callum Ridge arrived at 8:55 p.m. in a midnight Brioni suit, followed by 2 publicists, 1 photographer, and a woman in a champagne silk dress who moved as if every reflection belonged to her. Elodie Vane smiled at the staff before learning a single name, touched the orchid arrangement before asking who had placed it there, and glanced at the pearl-toned Meridian membership case as if it were a prop prepared for her entrance. Callum leaned near Nadira's cheek without quite touching her, and turned immediately toward the invited wellness investors from Palm Beach, Aspen, and Greenwich. His smile was perfect. His attention was not. Nadira had grown up 15 miles and a whole universe away from this room, in a narrow Baltimore row house where winter wind came through the kitchen window and her mother ironed uniforms under a flickering bulb. She had earned scholarships, studied governance documents with unusual hunger, and learned that elite spaces were not controlled by the loudest person in them, but by the person who understood what everyone was afraid to lose. The Meridian Spa was registered under Callum's Lifestyle Holding Group, but its real value lived in Nadira's architecture, the Meridian's sovereign membership charter, the discretion asset protection covenant, the private wellness data custody mandate, and the quiet algorithms that protected every VIP appointment from exposure. Callum called it ambience. Nadira called it infrastructure. At 9:03 p.m., the private guests gathered beneath a ceiling of smoked glass and hidden light, their diamond watches muted by robe sleeves, their voices low enough to prove they belonged there. A former appellate judge stood 6 feet from a tech founder's wife. A retired senator's daughter signed in without using her legal surname. A cosmetics heiress requested the North Hydrotherapy suite because she disliked mirrors after interviews. These people did not buy massages. They bought disappearance. Then Callum lifted a crystal flute of cucumber water and began his speech. He spoke about renewal, modern femininity, generational relevance, and the need to bring fresh energy into old luxury. Nadira listened as snow blurred the windows behind him, turning the skyline into a cold painting. Elodie stood at his right side, glowing under the best light in the room. Tonight, Meridian enters a new era, Callum said. The photographer raised his camera. Nadira did not move. Callum smiled wider, the polished kind of smile that had survived shareholder calls, magazine covers, and 3 public apologies written by someone else. He placed one hand lightly behind Elodie's back and announced that she would now serve as the creative head of the Meridian Circle, responsible for its member experience, brand partnerships, and private wellness direction. A small silence passed through the room. It was not shock. It was calculation. Elodie stepped forward and said she wanted the spa to feel more visible, more shareable, more alive, and Nadira watched Mrs. Haverly from Greenwich lower her eyes as if a door had just closed inside her. Visibility was not a luxury here. It was a threat. Elodie pointed toward the membership case and asked whether the VIP profiles could be reviewed before morning so she could understand the personalities behind the list. The concierge manager's hand tightened around her tablet. Callum laughed softly, as if competence were a minor detail. Nadira felt the warmth of the room on her face and the cold of the city behind the glass. She understood the moment exactly. This was not merely humiliation. It was liability wearing perfume. At 9:07 p.m., Callum's laughter floated beneath the smoked glass ceiling, smooth and practiced, while in the darker corner beside the hydrotherapy corridor, Nadira stood still enough for the room to forget she was breathing. Under the golden pendant lights, he looked effortless, one hand in his Brioni pocket, the other resting near Elodie, as if she were the future he had personally acquired. In the shadowed reflection of the window, Nadira watched the snow thicken over East 57th Street and turn the city below into a field of distant, trembling lights. She said nothing. Elodie reached for the pearl-toned Meridian membership case again, and this time the concierge manager, Elise Park, stepped half an inch forward before stopping herself. The case held 312 private profiles, each tied to a preference map, a recovery schedule, a family discretion note, and a billing structure protected under Nadira's private wellness data custody mandate. The value inside that case was not plastic, not status, not scented towels, or warm marble floors. It was trust. Callum smiled at the investors from Aspen and said, "Elodie has instinct." Nadira looked at the case. Elodie had instinct for cameras, not custody. Across the room, beneath the clean white wash of the press lights, Callum tilted his head and made the small joke that hurt more because it sounded harmless. He said Nadira had always been wonderful with details, the way a man might praise a housekeeper for remembering flowers. Several guests gave polite smiles, but Mrs. Haverly from Greenwich did not smile at all, and Dr. Anika Rowe, standing near the heated stone wall, lowered her glass without drinking. In the darker corner, Nadira's face remained calm, her eyes reflecting the city's blue winter light. The room split in two. Callum laughed beneath the lights, surrounded by champagne silk, camera lenses, and people who mistook volume for authority. Nadira stood in the quiet edge of the spa, framed by black marble, snow-lit glass, and the invisible weight of every system he had never bothered to understand. One side was performance. The other was ownership. At 9:12 p.m., Elodie asked for the executive tablet. Elise hesitated, then looked toward Nadira, because everyone who actually ran Meridian knew where authority lived even when the title had been handed elsewhere. Callum noticed the hesitation and his smile tightened by one careful degree. He told Elise to give Elodie whatever she needed, because we are not running a monastery. A small ripple moved through the room. Nadira remembered writing the Discretion Asset Protection Covenant at 3:16 a.m. During a February storm 2 years earlier, after a senator's daughter had begged for a wellness appointment under a name no one in the press would recognize. She remembered Callum calling it administrative paranoia. He had signed the approval without reading the second page. That second page mattered. Elodie accepted the tablet with both hands, her champagne silk sleeve sliding over her wrist, and tapped the screen as if unlocking a lifestyle magazine. She changed the evening recovery sequence without reading the medical preference notes, then asked why the staff looked nervous. She asked whether VIP members could be sorted by influence score, household net worth, and social reach. Dr. Anika's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Elise's lips parted, then closed. Outside, a snowplow scraped the avenue 42 floors below, the sound faint and metallic through triple-pane glass. The room felt warmer. The marriage felt colder. Callum leaned close to Elodie and murmured something that made her laugh, and the photographer captured it. The billionaire husband glowing under curated light, the new woman at his side, the wife reduced to the elegant background. But Nadira was watching the membership interface, not the insult. On the tablet, Elodie selected 3 private profiles and marked them for brand cultivation review. The phrase appeared in pale blue text across the screen. Nadira's right hand closed once around the seam of her emerald sleeve. That was the line. At 9:18 p.m., Elodie asked Elise to prepare a morning briefing with the top 20 Meridian women most likely to support a visibility campaign. A former appellate judge turned her face toward the window. The cosmetics heiress whispered one sentence to her assistant. Mrs. Haverly removed her robe reservation card from the side table and placed it face down, slowly, like a verdict. No one raised their voice. Callum did not hear the collapse beginning because it sounded like manners. Nadira stepped forward at last, her heels making a soft, exact sound against the heated basalt floor. Elodie looked pleased, as if expecting surrender. Callum gave Nadira a warning smile, the kind he used before quarterly earnings calls. Nadira stopped beside the membership case and touched the silver-white latch with 2 fingers. "The Meridian Circle is not a stage," she said. Callum exhaled a laugh. Elodie smiled wider. Nadira opened the case, removed 1 blank pearl membership card, and placed it on the marble between them. The card had no name yet, only the Meridian crest pressed into its surface and a thin encoded strip tied to the Elite Continuity Reserve Fund. Nadira bent it gently, not enough to be dramatic, only enough to make the room listen. The only sound was the cold crack of the pearl membership card breaking across the marble. Callum's smile faded. Elodie blinked. Nadira looked at the fractured card, then at her husband, and understood that he had not merely chosen another woman. He had chosen exposure over discretion, spectacle over stewardship, and vanity over the one currency luxury loses forever once it spends it badly. "Are you finished?" he asked softly. Nadira did not answer him. She looked toward Elise and said, "Freeze profile access under Meridian custody protocols." Elise's fingers moved before Callum could speak. The tablet screen dimmed, then locked. Across the glass, snow fell harder over Manhattan, and the city lights kept shining as if nothing sacred had just been broken. At 9:21 p.m., the tablet lock screen reflected Elodie's face in a pale blue glow, and for the first time that night her smile looked borrowed. Callum recovered faster, because men trained by publicists often mistake recovery for control, and he gave the room a small laugh meant to make Nadira look theatrical. Beneath the clean-pressed lights, he adjusted his cuff link and tilted his champagne glass toward the investors as if the broken pearl card were only a charming misunderstanding. Nadira remained in the darker edge of the room. Outside the windows, snow pressed harder against the 42nd floor, smearing the Manhattan skyline into strips of white and gold, while the heated basalt beneath her heels carried a warmth that never reached her marriage. The Meridian Circle guests watched without watching, that careful American habit of privilege, where no one interferes until reputation becomes a line item. Dr. Anika Rowe moved closer to Nadira, her cashmere wrap drawn tight, her eyes steady with the kind of concern that had no need for drama. Elise Park stood behind the concierge desk with both hands folded over the locked tablet, waiting for the only instruction that mattered. No one breathed loudly. Callum smiled beneath the lights, one shoulder angled toward Elodie and the camera, but in the dark reflection near the hydrotherapy corridor, Nadira stood still, precise, unreadable, already separate from him in every way that counted. He had an audience. She had authority. Elodie lifted her chin and said the access freeze was probably a transition glitch, the sort of phrase that sounded expensive until examined. Callum nodded, pleased by her confidence, and told Elise to override the lock because the Meridian Spa belonged to Ridge Lifestyle Holdings. The words landed on the marble with polished weight, but Nadira knew ownership of a building was not ownership of trust, data custody, member continuity, or founder origin intellectual property. She had learned that lesson long before money learned her name. At 9:24 p.m., she stepped to the concierge desk and removed the small nameplate pinned to the inner lapel of her emerald jacket. It was brushed platinum, no bigger than 2 inches, engraved only with Nadira Vale, founding steward, a title Callum once mocked as too quiet for branding. The nameplate had survived 5 annual audits, 312 member reviews, and every late-night call from clients who trusted her more than their own family offices. She placed it beside the broken pearl card. The only sound was the soft metallic click of Nadira's nameplate meeting the marble. Mrs. Haverly looked down. Dr. Anika closed her eyes once. Callum's mouth tightened before he turned it back into a smile. He said, "Nadira, don't make this awkward." She looked at him for a full 3 seconds, long enough for a camera to lower and for Elodie's fingers to stop moving against her silk dress. The city lights behind them flickered through the snow, distant office towers blinking red above Park Avenue, where people still worked late for fortunes they might never enjoy. Nadira thought of Baltimore at 6:10 a.m., of her mother's bus pass, of winter radiators clanging awake, of scholarship interviews where she learned to sound calm while being underestimated. She had not climbed into this room to beg for credit. She had built the room so carefully that people forgot it could stand without the man taking credit for it. Awkward is temporary, she said. Callum's laugh came back, thinner now, under the light. Nadira stayed in the shadow. She turned to Elise and asked for the Meridian guest ledger summary. Not the profiles, not the personal notes, only the administrative count allowed under the discretion asset protection covenant. Elise printed one narrow receipt from the concealed thermal unit beneath the desk. Active VIP memberships, pending renewals, reserve obligations, and continuity liabilities. Nadira took the receipt, folded it once, and slid it into her coat pocket. The paper was warm from the machine. The decision was cold. Elodie stepped closer, her perfume sweet over the eucalyptus, and said, "You can still advise us, Nadira." That was the mistake. Not the affair, not the title, not the press lights, but the assumption that the woman who designed the system would remain nearby to protect it after being replaced inside it. Nadira looked at Elodie's champagne silk, then at Callum's practiced smile, then at the broken card lying between them like a small white wound. "No," she said. At 9:29 p.m., Nadira walked toward the private lift while the snow thickened beyond the glass, and the spa's hidden speakers continued playing a soft piano arrangement too elegant for the moment. Callum called her name once, not with regret, but with irritation that sounded almost similar from a distance. She stopped beside the lift doors, where black bronze reflected her face and the city lights behind her like two separate lives. Then she delivered the line without raising her voice. "Revenge is noisy. This is consequence." The lift opened with a low chime. She stepped inside alone. As the doors closed, the last thing the room saw was not a wife leaving her husband, but a founder withdrawing her protection from a system that had mistaken her silence for permission. At 9:46 p.m., 12 minutes after Nadira Vale left the Meridian Spa, Callum Ridge was still under the golden lights, smiling as if a room could be managed by facial muscles alone. Elodie Vane stood beside him in champagne silk, laughing too brightly at a comment from a Palm Beach investor, while the broken pearl membership card remained on the Nero marking a marble like a small white warning no one wanted to touch. In the darker reflection near the private lift, the space where Nadira had stood looked almost untouched, but Elise Park kept glancing at it, as if authority had left a shadow behind. The room kept pretending. For blocks away, on East 53rd Street, Nadira entered a private legal office above a closed Fifth Avenue jewelry salon, where the windows faced a canyon of office towers, and the snow turned every ledge silver under the city's late lights. The office was not grand. It was quiet, coded, and built for people who did not want their names appearing in lobby directories. Dr. Anika Rowe was already there, seated at a walnut table with her cashmere wrap folded over one arm, beside two advisors from Nadira's old scholarship network and a compliance architect who had helped draft the original Meridian governance stack. No one offered pity. Nadira removed her emerald gloves. On the table were three screens, one matte black authentication pad, a sealed copy of the Meridian Sovereign Membership Charter, and a live reserve statement showing $42.6 million inside the Elite Continuity Reserve Fund. The scent here was not eucalyptus. It was printer heat, black coffee, and winter wool. At the Meridian Spa, Callum laughed beneath the lights and told the room that every luxury brand had a little turbulence during reinvention. In the dim legal office, Nadira sat without removing her coat, her face calm in the blue reflection of the monitors. He performed confidence. She activated consequence. At 9:52 p.m., the compliance architect opened the founder origin IP reversion clause and displayed the asset map Callum had never cared to read. Member tier algorithms, discretion routing software, therapist training modules, private suite sequencing, family office billing partitions, and every wellness protocol written under Nadira's maiden name holding entity. The Ridge Lifestyle Holdings logo appeared on one side of the screen. Beneath it, in smaller type, sat the truth, origin rights retained by Vale Stewardship Trust. Callum owned the marble. Nadira owned the mind beneath it. Dr. Anika confirmed that Elodie's request for influence scoring and visibility targeting created a formal reputational exposure risk under the Discretion Asset Protection Covenant. The advisor in gray opened the private wellness data custody mandate and entered the timestamp, 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, active snowfall, New York County jurisdiction. Nadira read every line before she touched the authentication pad. She had learned long ago that the wealthy did not fear anger. They feared paperwork that understood them. Back at Meridian, Elodie asked Elise for champagne service in the hydrotherapy lounge, trying to make the room feel festive again, and Callum raised his glass beneath the warm press lights, as if the night still belonged to him. In the legal office's darker glass, Nadira's reflection sat alone against a skyline of cold windows, still and exact, her hands folded beside the sealed charter. His side glittered. Her side moved. At 10:01 p.m., Nadira triggered the reputational harm acceleration trigger, not as revenge, not as theater, but as the protective mechanism built for precisely this kind of vanity. The system generated 312 pending member notices, each stripped of gossip, each written in language clean enough for a family office and sharp enough for a courtroom. The notices did not mention Callum's betrayal. They stated that Meridian VIP privileges were being suspended due to governance instability, data custody risk, and breach of discretion standards. Nadira added one sentence herself. Continuity care would be made available through a separate steward channel upon private confirmation. The advisor slid the matte black authorization pad toward her. The only sound was the dry seal of Nadira's thumbprint accepting the Meridian custody withdrawal. On the first screen, every active Meridian membership shifted into protective suspension, each file marked for private transition rather than abandonment. On the second, Elodie's access profile disappeared. On the third, the founder origin IP licenses reverted out of Ridge Lifestyle Holdings operating control, one restricted module at a time. Nadira watched the numbers settle. She did not smile. At 10:06 p.m., while snow covered East 57th Street and the towers of Midtown blinked red through the storm, every VIP member of the Meridian Circle received the same private message. At 10:07 p.m., the first pre-authorized reply came from Mrs. Haverly's family office. Transfer confirmed. At 10:08 p.m., the cosmetics heiress followed. At 10:09 p.m., the retired judge. Nadira looked at Dr. Anika, then back at the city. The spa still had music, marble, and Callum's public smile. It no longer had trust. At 10:18 p.m., the snow over Midtown had thickened into a white veil, and the Meridian Spa still glowed 42 floors above East 57th Street, like nothing had changed. Callum stood beneath the golden press lights, laughing softly with a Greenwich investor, one polished hand around a cut crystal flute, while Elodie posed near the hydrotherapy lounge as if the locked tablet were a minor technical delay. In the darker glass of the legal office on East 53rd Street, Nadira sat motionless before three monitors, the city lights behind her blurred by snow and distance, her face calm in the blue spill of confirmed transfers. He kept the room warm. She removed the oxygen. At 10:22 p.m., the Elite Continuity Reserve Fund opened its second channel, a discrete member relocation pathway registered under Vale House Initiative, Nadira's maiden name structure built years earlier for women who needed recovery without spectacle. It had begun as a quiet foundation with $2 million in seed capital from her first advisory fee, then grown into a $42.6 million reserve protected by a women-led trustee panel in Boston, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. Callum had once called it one of Nadira's little dignity projects, never asking why a woman who understood risk would place dignity inside a legal vehicle. That oversight now had a price. Dr. Anika Rowe reviewed the first relocation file. A former judge recovering from public scrutiny, a young founder escaping a predatory board, a mother of two rebuilding after a high-profile divorce. The women were not charity cases. They were proof of concept. Nadira's new model would take the luxury architecture Meridian had wasted and redirect it toward protection, healing, and practical power. Private therapy suites, financial coaching, employment pathways, legal review sessions, and wellness programs that did not ask broken women to perform gratitude. She did not build softness. She built shelter with teeth. At the Meridian Spa, Callum laughed beneath the light and told the guests that Nadira had always been sensitive about legacy. In the darker office, Nadira signed the Vale House Initiative Service Charter without changing expression, her pen moving across thick ivory paper beside a steaming cup of black coffee. His side sold reinvention. Her side funded refuge. The only sound was the firm drag of Nadira's signature sealing the Vale House Initiative Stewardship Charter. At 10:31 p.m., the first Meridian specialist resigned through the encrypted staff portal, citing continuity alignment with founder origin standards. At 10:33 p.m., two senior hydrotherapy directors followed. Both women Nadira had trained personally after recruiting them from overlooked clinics in Detroit and Newark. At 10:36 p.m., the aromatherapy supplier on Madison Avenue paused all exclusive blends pending verification of IP custody under the founder origin IP reversion clause. The spa did not fall loudly. It began losing its bones. Elodie finally noticed when the staff hallway stopped moving normally, when Elise Park did not return with champagne service, when 3 attendants quietly removed Meridian monogram trays from the VIP lounge and replaced them with plain white service cloths. She looked at Callum, waiting for him to fix the atmosphere the way rich men fix problems in rooms full of people watching. Callum smiled harder. Nadira watched the staffing map turn gray, one department at a time, not with triumph, but with the tired recognition of a woman who had warned the structure before it failed. Snow tapped against the legal office windows like dry grains of salt, and below, yellow taxis cut slow lines through black slush along Madison Avenue. Dr. Anika placed a fourth document on the table, the Discretion Asset Protection Covenant Transfer Acknowledgement, confirming that qualifying members could move into Vale House Initiative without exposing their identities, medical preferences, or family office billing routes. Nadira read the clause twice. Then she initialed every page. By 10:44 p.m., 271 of the 312 VIP members had opened the protected continuity channel, and new confirmations kept arriving in quiet, measured waves. Callum received the first internal revenue alert at 10:47 p.m. His phone lit up in his palm beneath the golden lights. Across the room, Elodie was still smiling for a photograph beside a heated stone fountain, unaware that the women she wanted to impress were already gone. Callum looked down, and the color drained beneath his perfect tan. In the legal office's dark reflection, Nadira did not smile. She simply closed the final folder, placed her hand flat over the Vale House seal, and whispered to Anika, "Now they are safe." Outside, the city kept shining through the snow, cold and beautiful, while one empire lost its center and another found its name. By 11:03 p.m., the Meridian Spa still looked flawless from the outside, a warm rectangle of amber light suspended above East 57th Street, while snow moved across Manhattan like torn silk. Inside, Callum Ridge stood beneath the press lights with a smile so controlled it had become almost mechanical, telling a San Francisco investor that membership transitions were routine luxury churn. Near the heated stone fountain, Elodie Vane adjusted the cuff of her champagne silk dress and laughed for a photographer who no longer knew what story he was capturing. In the darker legal office 4 blocks away, Nadira Vale sat beside Dr. Anika Rowe, silent before a live dashboard where the number of active Meridian VIP members had fallen to 17. His room glittered. Her screen told the truth. At 11:07 p.m., the first partner reversal arrived from a Swiss wellness diagnostics firm whose $9 per million placement agreement depended on verified discretion safeguards. The message did not sound emotional. It cited governance instability, unresolved data custody exposure, and failure to maintain the Discretion Asset Protection Covenant. 3 minutes later, the Madison Avenue Aromatherapy House suspended its exclusive scent formulas pending review under the Founder Origin IP reversion clause. At 11:13 p.m., a Beverly Hills skin technology supplier froze equipment calibration rights because the training modules had reverted to Vale Stewardship Trust. The spa did not lose beauty. It lost permission. Callum laughed beneath the lights and told Elodie that lawyers always exaggerated paperwork, but in the shadowed office, Nadira watched supplier after supplier detach from Ridge Lifestyle Holdings with the clean rhythm of doors closing in a private club. He dismissed documents. She understood leverage. The city beyond Nadira's window was blue, black, and silver, every tower blinking red through the storm, every taxi below moving slowly through slush like a thought trying to escape. She remembered Callum calling her operational standards too cautious, during a board dinner at 6:40 p.m. 18 months earlier, while he ordered a $1,200 bottle of Napa Cabernet and interrupted her twice before dessert. She had said nothing then because she had already placed the protections where interruptions could not reach them. Now those protections were speaking in timestamps. At 11:19 p.m., Elise Park sent a final staff note from Meridian. 11 senior attendants had resigned, for therapists had declined next-day appointments, and the North Hydrotherapy Suite had been shut down because its treatment sequence belonged to the private wellness data custody mandate. Nadira read the note once. She forwarded it to Anika. Callum's phone kept lighting up under the gold lights, each alert cutting into his performance with a pale electric flash. He turned his screen downward, but a Greenwich investor had already seen enough. Elodie touched his arm and whispered that they should announce a bold relaunch package before the story got away from them. Callum nodded too quickly. That was how panic looked when it still wore a custom suit. In the legal office, Nadira opened the reputational harm acceleration trigger archive and reviewed the automatic separation ledger. Member notices sent, data locks completed, IP custody restored, reserve continuity funded, partner notifications verified. The matte black authentication pad waited beside the last confirmation page. She did not hurry. She had been underestimated by people with nicer rooms and weaker memories for most of her life. The only sound was the crisp tear of the final Ridge-branded service addendum leaving the compliance binder. At 11:26 p.m., the torn page curled slightly on the walnut table, its embossed logo split cleanly through the center. Dr. Anika looked at it, then at Nadira, and said nothing because the silence was more respectful than comfort. Back at Meridian, the lights remained perfect, the marbles still shone, and Elodie still smiled beside a fountain that no longer belonged to the system she thought she commanded. Then the investor from San Francisco stepped away from Callum and made one quiet call to his family office. Mrs. Haverly's assistant retrieved her coat. The former appellate judge left without signing the revised membership renewal. At 11:31 p.m., Callum finally stopped laughing. Across town, Nadira closed the dashboard, folded her hands over the Vale House seal, and looked out at the snow-covered city with no triumph in her face. A downfall did not need a crash. Sometimes it arrived as a series of polite confirmations, each one saying the same thing in a different language. Trust had moved. At 11:44 p.m., the Meridian Spa had become a beautiful room pretending not to hear itself empty. Snow pressed against the 42nd floor glass in thick white streaks, and the city lights beyond East 57th Street blurred into gold and red, as if Manhattan were watching from behind wet eyes. Callum Ridge stood beneath the warm pendant lights with a smile that no longer reached his face, still telling the last two investors that luxury clients often needed privacy reassurance before returning. In the darker reflection, near the North Hydrotherapy corridor, Nadira Vale was no longer physically there, yet the silence she left behind stood straighter than anyone in the room. He kept laughing under the lights. Her absence governed the shadows. Elodie Vane finally stopped posing when the staff elevator opened and 3 senior therapists walked out wearing their winter coats over their uniforms. One carried a folded resignation notice. Another carried nothing but her phone and a calm expression. The third placed a white linen treatment towel on the concierge counter with both hands, like returning a borrowed flag. Elodie stared at them as if beauty should have been enough to make people obey. "You cannot leave during a relaunch," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. Elise Park looked at Callum, then at the locked tablet, then at the staff schedule that had turned into a field of red cancellations. At 11:49 p.m., the North Hydrotherapy Suite lost its final certified attendant because the treatment sequence remained bound to the private wellness data custody mandate and could not be performed under unauthorized supervision. Callum asked for a workaround. Elise answered with one sentence: "There is no legal substitute." Across town, in the East 53rd Street office, Nadira reviewed the same staff departures in silence, while Dr. Anika Rowe prepared transition packets for Vale House Initiative. The legal office lights were low, almost blue, and outside the window, Madison Avenue glimmered under snow, each taxi dragging a yellow line through the black slush 12 stories below. Nadira did not celebrate the resignations. She checked whether every departing worker had bridge pay, medical coverage, and safe placement options through the Elite Continuity Reserve Fund. This was the part Callum never understood. Consequence did not have to be cruel. It only had to be exact. Back at Meridian, Elodie's composure began to thin. She told a remaining attendant to move the influencers into the private recovery lounge and make the place look alive. Elise refused because the lounge was restricted under the Discretion Asset Protection Covenant. Elodie asked whether anyone there remembered who had been named creative head that evening. No one answered quickly enough. Her champagne silk dress, perfect under the lights an hour earlier, now looked too bright against the dark marble, like a costume worn into the wrong room. Callum pulled her aside near the heated stone fountain and whispered for her to calm down, still smiling toward the investors while his jaw tightened. Split by the glass and distance, he laughed beneath the lights, smoothing disaster with PR language, while in a darker office miles away, Nadira sat still, signing placement authorizations for women who had learned to rebuild quietly. His world needed applause. Hers needed no witness. At 11:56 p.m., Elodie made the mistake that ended the night. She opened her phone, turned toward the emptying lounge, and recorded a private video meant for her closed circle account, saying Meridian's older members were afraid of modern wellness because they wanted to hide behind money and age. She laughed once, small and sharp. The phone was still recording when Mrs. Haverly's assistant passed behind her, heard every word, and stopped. Within 4 minutes, the clip was in a family office thread that included 3 former Meridian members, 1 board advisor, and the San Francisco investor who had not yet left the building. Callum saw the message at 12:02 a.m. His face changed before he could train it not to. The only sound was the brittle tap of Elodie's phone striking the marble when Callum took it from her hand and missed the edge of the counter. The screen split across her own reflected smile. No one spoke. In the legal office, Nadira received a single forwarded notice from Dr. Anika. Reputational exposure confirmed. External leak not initiated by Vale House. Nadira read it once and placed the phone face down. She would not use Elodie's ugliness as entertainment. She had already won by refusing to become part of it. At 12:08 a.m., Callum called Nadira. The phone vibrated beside the Vale House seal, brightening the desk with his name. Nadira looked at it, then back at the transfer ledger, showing 309 confirmed transitions out of 312. Snow kept falling over Manhattan, soft and relentless, covering every polished surface outside with the same quiet color. She did not answer. At 12:09 a.m., her counsel sent one message to Ridge Lifestyle Holdings. All Meridian matters would proceed through representative review under the Founder Origin IP Reversion Clause, the Private Wellness Data Custody Mandate, and the Reputational Harm Acceleration Trigger. Callum stood in his glowing spa with a cracked phone, a panicked Mistress, and a brand that still smelled expensive but no longer felt safe. Nadira closed her laptop at 12:11 a.m. She had not raised her voice once. The Empire had made all the noise for her. 3 years later, at 7:38 p.m., Snow returned to Manhattan with the same quiet patience, covering the glass canopy of the Helix Women's Leadership Forum on West 44th Street, while the towers above Times Square blinked blue, white, and electric red through the winter haze. Inside the top-floor conference atrium, Nadira Vale stood beneath a suspended ring of warm lights, not beside a billionaire, not behind a brand, but at the center of a stage bearing the discreet emblem of Vale House Initiative. Her black satin suit was simple, her diamond stud small, her posture calm, and the applause around her carried the weight of numbers. 2,900 women served, $74 million in protected wellness funding, 21 legal aid partners, and 6 cities using her recovery model. She had become undeniable. Across the room, Callum Ridge stood near the sponsor wall in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, thinner in the face, older around the eyes, laughing softly with a banking executive as if laughter could still hide erosion. Under the bright event lights, he lifted a glass of sparkling water and performed ease for people who remembered when Ridge Lifestyle Holdings had sold off its wellness division at a 62% loss. In the darker reflection of the atrium windows, Nadira stood still beside Dr. Anika Rowe, city lights behind her, snow beyond the glass, untouched by the old need to be seen by him. He wore survival as charm. She wore freedom as fact. At 7:46 p.m., the moderator introduced Nadira as the founder of Vale House Initiative and architect of the Sovereign Wellness Continuity Model, a framework built from the Meridian Sovereign Membership Charter, the Discretion Asset Protection Covenant, and the Elite Continuity Reserve Fund she had once used to protect women the luxury world preferred to keep quiet. The audience included attorneys from Chicago, physicians from Atlanta, social workers from Baltimore, former Meridian members, and women who had rebuilt their lives without having to turn pain into a public performance. Nadira stepped to the podium and did not mention Callum. She spoke about access, privacy, restorative infrastructure, and the difference between charity and power. Protection should not be a luxury product, she said. Callum heard it from 27 feet away. Elodie Vane was not there. She had disappeared into smaller endorsements, softer rooms, and another polished life built on someone else's introductions. Callum, however, remained, a man trapped inside the public image he had once worshipped. He clapped when the room clapped. He smiled when cameras turned. But when Nadira described how weak systems punish quiet women and reward performance without stewardship, his hand froze around the glass. The only sound was the thin crack of Callum's glass rim tapping against his wedding ring, a ring he had kept wearing long after the separation papers were final, because regret had become his last piece of branding. Nadira did not look at him. At 8:03 p.m., Dr. Anika handed Nadira a commemorative folio, the Vale House Expansion Accord, approving 3 new recovery centers in Philadelphia, Detroit, and Oakland, backed by $64 million in pooled donor capital and governed under a new beneficiary dignity preservation rider. Nadira opened the folio, read the first page, and signed without ceremony. The ink settled into the paper under the warm light. The only sound was the smooth press of Nadira's pen sealing the expansion accord. Applause rose again, not loud in a vulgar way, but deep and sustained, the kind of applause that recognized labor no one had watched being done. Callum stood beneath the light, laughing faintly at something no one had said, while in the darker glass Nadira's reflection remained quiet, whole, and unreachable. His side still needed witnesses. Hers had become evidence. After the program, he approached her near the window where snow slid down the glass in silver threads, and the city below looked smaller than memory. He said her name carefully, as if it had become expensive. Nadira turned, composed, neither warm nor cruel. Callum looked at the woman he had once reduced to detail and finally understood that the detail had been the design. "I did not know you built all of it," he said. Nadira held his gaze for 2 measured seconds, the lights of Manhattan trembling behind her like distant verdicts. "No," she answered softly. "You knew. You just thought I would never take it with me." At 8:19 p.m., the snow outside the Helix Women's Leadership Forum softened the city into silver and black, and the lights of Times Square trembled below the top-floor windows like a world that had finally become small enough to leave behind. Callum Ridge stood 2 feet from Nadira Vale with his hands folded in front of him, no publicist beside him, no Elodie Vane in champagne silk, no press light strong enough to make him look unchanged. 3 years had carved the polish from his confidence. Ridge Lifestyle Holdings had sold the remains of the Meridian Spa. The wellness division had closed after losing 312 VIP memberships in one night, and the buyer's final audit had named the cause in language too clean to argue with: collapse of member confidence following discretionary governance failure. The promise of that night had completed itself in silence. He had let his mistress run her luxury spa, and Nadira had canceled every VIP membership before his arrogance could turn private trust into public decoration. Callum looked past her toward the stage where Vale House Initiative donors were still gathered around the newly signed expansion accord, and for 1 second, he seemed to understand that the women he once dismissed had built something his money could not repurchase. Nadira did not look triumphant. She looked free. He said he was sorry, softly, almost carefully, as if the word might break if handled with too much performance. He admitted that Elodie had never understood Meridian, that he had mistaken attention for leadership, that he had treated Nadira like an elegant accessory while depending on the invisible architecture she had designed. He said he had watched every client leave, every partner retreat, every protected member transfer into Vale House under the Meridian governance stack she had built before he ever thought to question it. He said he finally understood that canceling the VIP memberships had not been revenge, it had been protection. Nadira listened without interrupting. Outside, snow slid down the glass in pale threads, and below them, the city kept shining with the indifferent beauty of a place that had seen many powerful men become ordinary after losing the women who made them look exceptional. Callum asked if there was any road back, not to the spa, not to the company, but to her. The question came too late, but late questions still deserve honest answers. Nadira thought of the broken Pearl membership card on black marble, the nameplate she had left behind, the thumbprint that withdrew custody, the 312 private notices sent into the night, the women who had arrived at Vale House afraid and left with plans, lawyers, therapy, and bank accounts of their own. She had forgiven him long before this moment, not because he had earned it, but because carrying his failure would have given him another room inside her life. Forgiveness was not a doorway. It was a release form. The only sound was the soft close of Nadira's folio as she tucked the signed Vale House expansion accord beneath her arm. Callum looked at that folio the way he had once looked at the Meridian membership case, finally understanding that paper, in the right woman's hands, could move entire worlds without raising its voice. Nadira gave him one calm nod, neither cruel nor tender, and stepped toward the elevators where Dr. Anika Rowe waited beneath the warm amber lights. Callum said her name once more. She turned just enough for him to see that nothing in her was waiting anymore. Not my life. Some people call it cold when a woman refuses to return to the place that taught her pain, but sometimes that refusal is the first truly warm thing she ever gives herself. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.